In the months before June 6, 1944, the world held its breath. The Allies were preparing for the largest amphibious invasion in history, a bold strike meant to break Hitler's hold on Western Europe. This operation would later be known as Operation Overlord. Its success depended not only on military strength but also on secrecy and surprise. To achieve this, the Allies created an intricate web of deception designed to mislead the German High Command and keep them guessing about the true location of the invasion. The Germans believed the most likely invasion point was the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. It was the closest crossing and heavily fortified by German troops. The Allies encouraged this belief through a broader strategic plan called Operation Bodyguard. At the heart of this deception was Operation Fortitude. Fortitude convinced the Germans that a massive army, led by General George S. Patton, was stationed in southeastern England, poised to strike at Calais at any moment. The illusion of strength and readiness was carefully constructed and maintained over months, shaping German perceptions at every level. The deception employed a range of tools. Fake radio traffic reported troop movements, supply requests, and daily operations for divisions that did not exist. Inflatable tanks, wooden landing craft, and dummy aircraft were positioned along the southern coast of England to fool aerial reconnaissance. Double agents, especially a Spaniard named Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, sent detailed but false reports to German intelligence. The Germans trusted him completely, believing he ran a vast spy network in Britain. In reality, every agent he referenced was a fabrication. His reports were rich in detail, perfectly matching the expectations and fears of German commanders, making the deception almost impossible to detect. The British controlled every German spy in the United Kingdom through the double-cross system. Rather than arresting these operatives, they were turned into double agents. This allowed the Allies to feed Germany a steady stream of carefully constructed lies. Meanwhile, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park monitored German communications. Every intercepted message was analyzed to confirm that the deception was effective. By observing German reactions, the Allies could adjust their strategies and maintain the illusion of an imminent attack on Calais. As spring 1944 approached, the Germans concentrated more heavily on Pas de Calais. Divisions were moved into the area, and additional fortifications were constructed. Hitler ordered concrete bunkers, minefields, and heavy artillery emplacements along the French coast. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, one of Germany's most capable commanders, was tasked with defending the Atlantic Wall. He traveled constantly, inspecting defenses and urging readiness among his troops. Yet even Rommel could not determine the true target of the Allies. The false intelligence from Garbo and other agents reinforced his assumption that the main strike would come at Calais. In early June, poor weather delayed the invasion. German commanders interpreted this as confirmation of their assumptions. They believed the Allies would not risk crossing the Channel under difficult conditions. Rommel left his headquarters to visit his wife in Germany for her birthday, confident that no invasion would occur while storms battered the English Channel. His absence left a leadership gap at a critical moment, further complicating the German response. In the early hours of June 6th, Allied ships crossed the Channel. Paratroopers landed behind enemy lines, severing communications and securing bridges to disrupt German defenses. At dawn, thousands of soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. The German response was slow and disorganized. Many officers believed the landings were a diversion. They expected the main assault to come at Calais, and Hitler himself hesitated to release armored divisions stationed nearby, fearing a trap. Throughout the day, reports from Garbo and other double agents reinforced this belief. They claimed that Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group remained ready to attack Calais at any moment. The German High Command, convinced by these signals, delayed critical counterattacks. By the time they realized Normandy was the true target, the Allies had secured a strong foothold on the beaches, gaining the crucial momentum needed for the campaign that would follow. The delay had severe consequences for Germany. Panzer divisions that might have counterattacked and pushed the Allies back into the sea remained idle for critical hours. German troops at Normandy fought fiercely but were unable to halt the invasion without reinforcements. Meanwhile, soldiers stationed at Calais stood ready for an attack that never came. The deception was so effective that even weeks after D-Day, Hitler remained convinced Normandy was only a feint, and he refused to move his forces until it was too late. For the Allied soldiers on the beaches and in the hedgerows beyond, the web of deception was invisible. They faced the chaos of combat without knowing the intelligence work that had shaped the battlefield. Yet, in the war rooms of London and Washington, planners understood the magnitude of their achievement. They had not just landed an army. They had manipulated the enemy's mind, turning falsehoods into strategic advantage. The network of signals, spies, and misleading evidence had created the space for success. The story of June 6, 1944, is often told through the bravery of soldiers on Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. Yet behind the bullets and bombs lay a quieter, hidden war. Operation Fortitude, with all its intricate layers, had forced the Germans to fight where they were not, to anticipate attacks that would never come, and to ignore the one that did. By diverting attention and shaping perception, the Allies changed the course of the battle and perhaps the war itself. In the early months of 1944, while Allied troops trained for the coming invasion of Europe, a different kind of army was being built. This army did not fight on the battlefield. It existed only on maps, in messages, and in the minds of the enemy. Its purpose was to confuse and mislead the German high command about where the invasion would strike. The success of this deception would ultimately determine the fate of Operation Overlord, and perhaps the speed with which the war in Western Europe could be won. The Allies knew that the Germans expected an attack somewhere along the French coast. The most obvious location was the Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing point between Britain and France. The Germans had poured resources into heavy defenses there, building concrete bunkers, artillery emplacements, minefields, and strongpoints designed to repel any amphibious assault. If the Allies could convince Germany that Calais was the main target, the actual landing at Normandy would have a far higher chance of success, catching the Germans off guard and stretching their defenses thin. To achieve this, the Allies created a massive fake formation known as the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. This phantom army was commanded by General George S. Patton, who had a reputation as one of America's most aggressive and effective generals. The Germans respected Patton and assumed that if he were leading the invasion, it would strike at the most obvious and strategically significant point, Calais. In reality, Patton's army consisted of rubber tanks, wooden aircraft, fake landing craft, and dummy vehicles carefully placed across southeastern England to create the illusion of preparation for a major assault. From the air, these decoys looked remarkably real. German reconnaissance flights photographed what appeared to be massive troop concentrations and military infrastructure, believing these sites to be staging areas for an imminent attack. On the ground, Allied teams built convincing encampments complete with roads, tents, supply dumps, and even laundry lines. Vehicles were moved along roads in deliberate patterns to suggest constant activity and logistical support for divisions that did not exist. Every detail was designed to make the illusion convincing, from the angle of shadows cast by dummy tanks to the tracks left in dirt roads. The deception went far beyond visual tricks. Radio operators sent a steady stream of fake messages between units of FUSAG. These transmissions included realistic reports, supply requests, movement orders, and daily operational updates. German intelligence intercepted this traffic and analyzed it thoroughly, interpreting it as evidence of a massive, ready-to-strike force. The Germans were unaware that the communications were carefully scripted performances, designed to create exactly the impression the Allies wanted. Spies played an equally critical role. Over the course of the war, British counterintelligence had captured nearly every German agent sent to the United Kingdom. Instead of executing or imprisoning them, the British converted many into double agents under a system called the double-cross system. These agents fed Germany carefully crafted lies, confirming the visual and radio-based evidence of a massive army. Their reports bolstered the illusion and reinforced German assumptions about the location of the Allied strike. One of the most important agents was a Spaniard named Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. Garbo built an elaborate fictional spy network and sent detailed reports about troop movements, supply lines, and even internal disputes that never actually occurred. His credibility with German intelligence was so strong that he was considered one of their most valuable sources. Every false report he sent reinforced the existence of Patton's army and the imminent threat to Calais. He became a central figure in the deception, carefully crafting messages that perfectly matched what German commanders wanted to see. The deception effort was organized into two main operations. Operation Fortitude North created the impression that an Allied force was preparing to invade Norway, forcing the Germans to maintain significant divisions far from France. Operation Fortitude South focused on convincing the Germans that the main assault would come at Calais. Together, these operations forced the Germans to disperse their forces and prepare defenses over a wide geographic area, weakening their ability to respond to the true invasion at Normandy. To measure the success of the deception, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park monitored German communications. Using advanced techniques, they read encrypted messages sent between German commanders and the High Command in Berlin. These intercepted reports provided direct evidence of German beliefs. When messages described the buildup of Patton's Phantom Army or preparations for a defense at Calais, the Allies knew their deception was succeeding. This constant flow of intelligence allowed them to refine their tactics, adding new layers of fake reports, radio traffic, and visual tricks whenever needed. By late May 1944, the deception had reached its peak. German commanders were convinced that Calais was the main target. Even after the real landings began at Normandy on June 6, many German leaders continued to believe it was a diversion. They expected Patton's supposed army to strike at Calais at any moment. This belief delayed the movement of reinforcements to Normandy, giving the Allies crucial time to secure the beaches, expand their beachhead, and begin the push inland. The complexity of the deception was staggering. It involved thousands of people, from radio operators to artists painting fake equipment, from soldiers building mock camps to logistics teams orchestrating fake movements. Every detail mattered. A single careless signal, an inconsistent report, or a poorly placed dummy could have exposed the plan. Yet the system held, and the illusion remained convincing even under scrutiny. While soldiers trained and prepared for the brutal fighting to come, another war was being waged in secret. This war did not involve bullets or bombs. It was fought in signals, shadows, and stories, shaping the battlefield before the first soldier stepped ashore. Operation Fortitude did not fire a single shot, yet it molded the enemy's perception, controlling where and when they would commit their forces. By the time German commanders realized the truth, the beaches of Normandy were already secure, and the balance of power in Western Europe had shifted. In the spring of 1944, tension gripped both sides of the war in Western Europe. Along the French coast, the Germans had built the Atlantic Wall, a chain of bunkers, gun positions, and minefields designed to repel any invasion. Thousands of soldiers manned these defenses, ready to fight off an attack they knew was coming. The problem for the Germans was that they did not know where the blow would fall. The German High Command faced a difficult challenge. Their coastlines stretched for hundreds of miles. If they guessed wrong, they could leave the true landing site exposed. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel believed the best defense was to meet the invasion at the beaches. He pushed to place tanks and infantry as close to the shoreline as possible. Other generals argued for holding their armored divisions inland, ready to counterattack once the main thrust became clear. Hitler himself was the final authority. He distrusted his commanders and often made decisions based on his own instincts. He was convinced that an invasion was coming, but he could not decide where. Some of his advisors insisted that Normandy was the target. Others argued that the Allies would strike at the Pas de Calais, the closest point to England. Hitler wavered, unwilling to commit his reserve forces until he had absolute proof. While the Germans debated, the Allies were listening. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted and read German messages. These reports revealed the confusion inside the German ranks. They also showed that the deception plan was working. Many German commanders believed Normandy was only a feint, a distraction meant to draw them away from Calais. As June approached, weather over the English Channel grew stormy. Strong winds and rough seas made a landing seem impossible. German meteorologists predicted that no invasion could take place under such conditions. This reinforced their belief that there was no immediate danger. On June 5th, Rommel even left his headquarters to travel inland and visit his wife for her birthday. His absence would have serious consequences the next day. In the early hours of June 6th, Allied ships crossed the channel under cover of darkness. Airborne troops dropped behind enemy lines to cut roads, seize bridges, and disrupt communications. When German outposts reported the parachute landings, confusion spread. Some officers dismissed the reports, assuming they were small raids. Others believed they were part of a larger attack. At dawn, the full scale of the operation became clear. Thousands of Allied soldiers stormed 5 beaches along the Normandy coast: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. German defenders fought hard, inflicting heavy casualties, especially at Omaha Beach. Yet the critical armored divisions that could have driven the Allies back were still waiting for orders. Messages raced between German headquarters and Berlin. Reports came in of fierce fighting at Normandy, but many senior officers insisted that this was only a diversion. They were convinced that Patton's army would attack at Calais once the Germans moved their reserves. Hitler hesitated. He ordered his generals to hold back their tanks until he was certain of the main threat. The hours passed. On the beaches, Allied troops pushed inland, establishing footholds despite the strong resistance. Each minute that passed without a German counterattack strengthened their position. Rommel, still away from the front, could not influence the response. His subordinates argued, but no one dared act without Hitler's direct approval. By mid-morning, Allied intercepts confirmed the scale of German confusion. Messages from the German High Command described Normandy as a secondary attack. The Germans were holding back their most powerful units in the Calais region, waiting for a strike that would never come. Allied commanders knew their deception had worked, but they also understood how narrow their margin was. A timely counterattack could still have thrown their forces into the sea. On the ground, German soldiers at Normandy fought with determination. Machine gun nests and artillery positions took a heavy toll on the landing troops. Yet, without tank support, they could not stop the relentless Allied advance. In some sectors, German units fought to the last man. In others, they were forced to retreat as Allied numbers grew overwhelming. As night fell, the truth began to sink in. There had been no attack at Calais. The forces seen there by German reconnaissance were ghosts, decoys, and illusions. But by then, it was too late. The Allies held the beaches and were bringing in reinforcements and supplies. The delay caused by Hitler's hesitation and the false reports from Allied double agents had given them the time they needed. For the Germans, the day had been marked by uncertainty and missed opportunities. Their powerful armored divisions had been frozen in place, awaiting orders that never came. Their commanders had been divided and indecisive, unsure where to strike. For the Allies, the gamble of deception had paid off. They had won not only through strength of arms but through confusion sown in the enemy's mind. The drama of June 6th was not only in the battles fought on the beaches. It played out in distant headquarters, in intercepted messages, and in the decisions made or delayed by men at the highest levels of command. While soldiers bled in the surf and fields of Normandy, the outcome of the day hinged on a chain of hesitation and misjudgment that began long before the first landing craft hit the shore. At dawn on June 6, 1944, German coastal units sent frantic messages up the chain of command. Allied ships filled the horizon, and paratroopers were already behind their lines. Many German officers could not believe what they were hearing. For weeks, they had been told that the real invasion would come at Pas de Calais. Normandy was considered a secondary threat, a diversion meant to pull forces away from the main target. As more reports came in, the picture became clearer. 5 beaches were under assault by an enormous Allied force. Even then, disbelief lingered. Some German commanders clung to the idea that this was still a feint. They argued that the main blow was still to come at Calais, led by General Patton's supposed army waiting in southeast England. The initial shock turned to anger and confusion at Hitler's headquarters. Hitler was asleep when the first reports reached Berlin. His aides refused to wake him without proof, a delay that cost critical hours. When he finally received the news, his reaction was rage. He shouted at his generals, accusing them of failing to anticipate the attack. His fury, however, did not lead to clear action. He remained convinced that Normandy might be a distraction. As a result, he refused to release the powerful panzer divisions stationed near Calais. Those tanks, which could have thrown the Allies back into the sea, sat idle while the battle raged. At German field headquarters, the situation was chaotic. Commanders requested reinforcements, only to be told to wait for Hitler's decision. Some officers argued for immediate counterattacks. Others insisted on holding back until the threat at Calais became certain. This paralysis frustrated many experienced soldiers. Messages flew back and forth, but few concrete orders came down. Rommel, the general charged with defending the Atlantic Wall, was not even present. He had gone inland the day before to visit his wife for her birthday, believing the poor weather made an invasion unlikely. When he returned and saw the scale of the landings, he was furious. He demanded immediate action, but by then the Allies had already built a foothold. In the weeks that followed, Rommel openly criticized the High Command. He blamed their hesitation and Hitler's interference for Germany's failure to respond effectively. For the soldiers on the ground, the shock was overwhelming. Many German troops at Normandy were young and inexperienced. They had been told the Atlantic Wall was impregnable. When they saw the sheer number of Allied ships and landing craft, they realized how wrong that belief had been. Some fought with desperate determination, manning machine gun nests and firing artillery until they were overrun. Others fled in panic as Allied forces surged inland. As the day went on, German disbelief turned into grim recognition. Reports from the front confirmed that this was not a diversion. Normandy was the main invasion, but by the time this truth sank in, it was too late to fully commit reserves. The moment for a decisive counterattack had passed. In Allied command centers across England, the mood was tense at first. Planners watched messages from the beaches and from their network of spies. The initial reports were chaotic. Some units faced heavy resistance. Omaha Beach in particular saw staggering losses in the opening hours. There was fear that the entire operation might fail. Then new information began to arrive. Intercepted German messages confirmed that the deception plan had worked. The Germans still believed Patton's Phantom Army was poised to attack Calais. They were holding back key forces, waiting for a battle that would never come. Relief spread through the Allied staff. The gamble had paid off. For the intelligence officers who had built the deception, the confirmation was deeply satisfying. Months of false reports, fake equipment, and elaborate staging had done their job. Juan Pugil Garcia, known as Garbo, sent one final message to the Germans claiming that Normandy was only the first phase. His words reinforced their belief in the threat to Calais, buying even more time for Allied troops. On the beaches, soldiers knew nothing of these shadow games. Their focus was survival. They fought through barbed wire, machine gun fire, and mined obstacles. They saw comrades fall beside them and pushed forward because there was no other choice. The delay in the German counterattack gave them the breathing room they needed, though they did not understand why their enemy was slow to respond. As night fell, the scale of what had been achieved became clear. Allied ships unloaded wave after wave of reinforcements. The beachheads were secure, though the cost had been high. In England, commanders celebrated cautiously. They knew the fight ahead would be brutal, but they also understood how close they had come to disaster. For the spies and planners, there were quiet celebrations. No parades or public recognition marked their success. In secret rooms, they shook hands and exchanged brief words of congratulations. They had shaped the battlefield without firing a shot. Their tools were lies, codes, and controlled leaks of information. The knowledge that their work had saved thousands of lives was reward enough. In Germany, the mood was far darker. Officers who had argued for an immediate counterattack now faced recrimination. Some were dismissed or sidelined. Others remained silent, knowing that open criticism of Hitler could be deadly. Rommel, never one to hide his opinions, spoke openly of the mistakes made. His frustration grew as the Allies pushed inland and German positions collapsed. The human reactions on both sides revealed the hidden cost of the day. For the Germans, it was the crushing weight of surprise and failure. For the Allies, it was relief mixed with sorrow for the dead. And for those who had waged war through deception, it was the quiet knowledge that their unseen work had turned the tide before the first soldier stepped ashore. In the hours after the first Allied soldiers came ashore at Normandy, the German command structure faltered. Hitler's hesitation and the belief that Normandy was only a diversion left critical units in place around the Pas de Calais. The German armored divisions stationed there were some of the most powerful in Europe. If they had moved quickly to Normandy, they could have struck at the vulnerable beachheads before the Allies brought in reinforcements. Instead, they waited for orders that never came. This delay allowed the Allies to expand their positions along the coast and establish a strong defensive line. By the evening of June 6th, the outcome of the day was clear. The Allies had not been driven back into the sea. Despite heavy losses, especially on Omaha Beach, they controlled key sections of the shoreline. German forces still held towns and villages inland, but the invaders were no longer confined to the beaches. They had begun to dig in, build supply routes, and bring in tanks, artillery, and more troops. Each passing hour made it harder for Germany to mount a successful counterattack. The strategic consequences of this failure spread quickly. In the days after D-Day, Hitler continued to believe the main Allied attack would come at Calais. Reports from double agents reinforced this belief. He kept elite divisions in place there, waiting for a battle that never came. As a result, the German units fighting in Normandy were outnumbered and outgunned. They fought with determination, but they lacked the strength to push the Allies back. The loss of flexibility crippled German strategy. Rommel and other field commanders repeatedly requested permission to move their reserves, but their appeals were denied or delayed. Even when Hitler finally released some units, it was too late. By mid-June, the Allies had brought vast amounts of equipment across the Channel. Entire divisions landed each day. The balance of power shifted decisively. As the Germans struggled to contain the invasion, they also faced pressure on other fronts. In Italy, Allied forces continued to advance northward. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union was preparing for a massive offensive. Hitler now faced a two-front war he could no longer manage. Normandy had forced Germany into a defensive posture across the west. This weakened their ability to respond to Soviet attacks in the east. On the ground in France, the consequences were immediate and devastating. German strongpoints along the Atlantic Wall fell one by one. Coastal batteries that had once threatened Allied ships were destroyed by naval gunfire or captured by infantry. The illusion of an impregnable defense crumbled. As Allied forces moved inland, they cut roads and railways, isolating German units. Towns like Caen and St. Lo became bitter battlegrounds. The Germans fought hard to delay the Allied advance, but their positions were steadily overrun. By late July, the Allies launched Operation Cobra, a breakout offensive that shattered German lines in Normandy. Once the front collapsed, German forces began a rapid retreat toward the Seine River. Thousands of soldiers were captured in the Falaise Pocket, a disastrous encirclement that marked the end of organized German resistance in the region. The retreat opened the road to Paris and, eventually, to the borders of Germany itself. For the Allies, the success at Normandy had far-reaching effects. The landing opened a true Western front. For years, the Soviet Union had carried the main burden of fighting Germany in Europe. Now, with a second front established, the Allies could attack from both directions. This forced Germany to split its resources and fight on multiple fronts at once. The deception operations that had protected the landing became a model for future military planning. Operation Fortitude showed that information could be as powerful as weapons. By convincing the enemy to act on false assumptions, the Allies had shaped the battlefield before the first shot was fired. This lesson was studied carefully in the months and years that followed. In practical terms, the Normandy landings allowed the Allies to bring their full industrial and logistical power into Western Europe. Ports were captured and rebuilt. Supply lines stretched across the Channel and into the heart of France. Millions of tons of equipment flowed into the theater, giving Allied armies a decisive advantage. Germany could no longer replace its losses at the same rate. Each battle drained their remaining strength. The psychological impact was just as significant. For German soldiers and civilians, the defeat at Normandy shattered the belief that the Reich could hold its western defenses. News of the landings spread quickly, and with it came fear and doubt. Even the most loyal commanders began to question Hitler's decisions. His insistence on holding ground at all costs led to unnecessary losses and further resentment within the officer corps. Among the Allies, morale soared. The success of the landings proved that the long months of preparation had been worth it. Soldiers who had trained endlessly for the invasion now saw tangible results. The planners and intelligence officers who had built the deception operations understood the scale of what they had accomplished. Their work had not only saved lives on D-Day but had also set the stage for a rapid Allied advance. As summer turned to autumn, the consequences of D-Day continued to unfold. The Allies liberated Paris in August. By September, they reached the German border. The war was far from over, but the strategic initiative had shifted completely. Germany was now reacting to Allied moves rather than dictating the course of events. The momentum was irreversible. The delay in German decision-making on June 6 was a turning point. A few hours of hesitation had given the Allies the foothold they needed. From that small beginning, they built a campaign that would eventually bring them to Berlin. The deception that had kept German forces in the wrong place at the wrong time was not merely a clever trick. It was a decisive factor in the defeat of Nazi Germany and the liberation of Western Europe. When the war ended in 1945, the full story of what had taken place before D-Day remained hidden. The men who had planned and carried out Operation Fortitude returned to their normal lives in silence. They could not speak about what they had done. The deception operations were still classified, their details locked away in government files. For years, the public believed the victory at Normandy had been achieved solely through overwhelming military force. The shadow war of false signals, fake armies, and double agents was almost completely unknown. Slowly, over the following decades, documents began to be released. As historians gained access to these records, a different picture of D-Day emerged. The success of the landings had depended not only on courage and logistics but also on the ability to mislead the enemy. Operation Fortitude became a central focus of this new understanding. Military historians studied the plan carefully. They saw how the Allies had manipulated German intelligence at every level. The complexity of the deception impressed even the most skeptical analysts. It was not a single trick or a handful of false reports. It was an entire system of lies, each one reinforcing the others. Inflatable tanks and dummy aircraft convinced German pilots of the existence of an army that did not exist. Radio traffic created the illusion of movement and supply operations. Double agents like Juan Pujol Garcia, known as Garbo, provided a human voice to the deception, sending messages that confirmed what German commanders already believed. What stood out to historians was the precision with which the plan had been managed. The Allies had monitored German reactions through intercepted communications. When a false report was accepted, they built on it. When a piece of information was questioned, they adjusted their story. It was a dynamic process like a chess game played across Europe. The stakes were life and death. A single misstep could have exposed the entire operation. By the time all the pieces were in place, the Germans were fully committed to the wrong conclusion. They were convinced that the main invasion would come at the Pas de Calais. Even after the landings at Normandy, they continued to expect a second, larger attack. This belief held their reserves in place for weeks, long enough for the Allies to secure their position. As these facts became public, strategists and military planners took note. Operation Fortitude was more than a wartime success. It was a lesson in the power of information. Future military doctrines began to incorporate deception as a core element of planning. During the Cold War, both NATO and the Warsaw Pact studied the D-Day deception in detail. They recognized that in an era of nuclear weapons and global surveillance, misleading the enemy could be as important as defeating them on the battlefield. For intelligence agencies, the lessons were even more direct. The use of double agents, controlled leaks, and careful manipulation of enemy beliefs became standard practice. Fortitude demonstrated how a network of operatives could influence decisions at the highest levels of an opposing government. The double-cross system, which had managed every German spy in Britain, became a model for counterintelligence programs worldwide. The cultural impact of Operation Fortitude grew alongside its historical significance. As more information was declassified, writers and filmmakers began to explore the story. Books about D-Day started to include chapters on the deception effort. Some works focused entirely on the Shadow War, revealing the hidden figures who had shaped history from behind the scenes. The story of Juan Pujol Garcia captured the public imagination. Garbo had been an unlikely hero. Before the war, he had no military background and no experience in espionage. Through determination and creativity, he built a fictional spy network that fooled one of the most powerful intelligence services in the world. By the end of the war, the Germans considered him one of their top agents. They awarded him the Iron Cross, unaware that every message he sent had been crafted by British intelligence. Garbo's life after the war was marked by secrecy. To protect him, the British helped him disappear. For years, many believed he had died. When his story finally emerged, it became a symbol of how individuals could alter the course of history. Films and documentaries retold his exploits, showing how one man's lies helped save thousands of lives. Other figures involved in the deception remained in the shadows. Many operatives never received public recognition. Their work was buried under layers of classification. Some historians have argued that these men and women deserve as much credit as the generals who led the armies on D-Day. Without their efforts, the landings might have ended in disaster. In popular culture, the drama of Normandy often focuses on the beaches, the soldiers charging through surf and sand under fire. The quieter war of intelligence and deception does not lend itself to heroic imagery. Yet over time, filmmakers found ways to tell these stories. Documentaries used archival footage and interviews with surviving participants. Feature films incorporated elements of the deception into broader narratives about the war. Each retelling helped bring the secret history of Operation Fortitude into public view. As veterans of the war aged, their memories became an important source of information. Oral histories captured their perspectives, adding depth to the documentary record. Some intelligence officers spoke for the first time about the operations they had helped to run. Their accounts revealed the tension and uncertainty of working in deception. They described the constant fear of exposure and the careful planning required to maintain the illusion. The study of Operation Fortitude also influenced academic fields beyond military history. Scholars of psychology examined how belief systems could be manipulated on a national scale. Political scientists analyzed the decision-making processes that led German commanders to accept false information. Even in business and technology, the principles of deception found unexpected applications. The idea of shaping an opponent's choices by controlling the information they receive became relevant in many contexts. Over the decades, museums and memorials dedicated to D-Day began to include exhibits on the deception effort. Visitors could see replicas of the inflatable tanks and dummy landing craft used to fool German reconnaissance. Interactive displays showed how messages were encrypted and decrypted, how radio operators created convincing patterns of communication, and how double agents passed their reports. These exhibits helped the public understand that victory had been achieved not only through strength but also through cunning. The legacy of Operation Fortitude continues to grow as new documents are released and new generations learn about the war. Each revelation adds detail to a story that was once hidden. The deception has become a symbol of strategic creativity, showing that battles can be won through ideas as well as weapons. It reminds historians, soldiers, and civilians alike that the truth of war is often more complex than it first appears. The impact of this operation reaches beyond the past. It shaped how modern militaries think about information, intelligence, and strategy. It also shaped how societies remember their history. Through books, films, museums, and public discourse, the story of fortitude lives on, connecting the secret decisions made in 1944 to the world we live in today.